Imagine a world without oil. How would we be affected? Did you know that there was an online game designed to explore exactly that theme back in 2007, a decade ago? The tagline for the website was, "Play it before you live it." Designed as a collaborative simulation of a global oil shortage, and as a massively collaborative imagining of the first 32 weeks of a global oil crisis, it provided an alternative reality chronicled online in 15,000 personal blog entries, videos, voicemails, and images that became, quote, "a serious game for the public good," end quote, and future-changing experience. Critics called it an alternate reality game with a conscience, a raging success contributing to positive social change, end quote. The video accompanying it darkly welcomed us to a world without electricity, heat, travel, cars, plastic, champagne, security, stability, caviar, oil. It underscored the reality that all of these things that we take for granted and more are currently dependent on oil. The game was intended to open our eyes and infect our minds with realities and possibilities as we attempt to transition to a net zero carbon future. And it used the mantra that has gained popularity since Buckminster Fuller's World Game and the Club of Rome's computer simulations of the limits to growth that, quote, "the best way to change the future is to play with it first." The idea was to collect the stories of people living in a world without oil, and through the simulation come up with solutions and getting them out there. Some people posted pictures, some created comics, some simulated novellas, and it brought people together from all corners of the globe engaged in an exercise for imagining the future so we don't have to live it. The players simulated the changes they would like to see in their own lives, rather than merely in a computer simulation environment. The 60,000 participants from around the world showed that in the context of a game, people would engage in things they might never participate in their normal lives. Some players said that as a result of playing the game, they actually started using cloth bags at stores, walking more and driving less, turning off lights, recycling and becoming a different person. World Without Oil was part of the serious game movement that, quote, intends more than entertainment for its players, generally aiming to teach or train, often by realistically simulating some aspect of a world system, end quote. There are business training games now, disaster preparedness games, flight or driving simulators, patients that help patients understand how their bodies are fighting an infection, says the website. And this notion fits in very well with systems thinking, because as the definition states, quote, "serious games allow players to test and experiment with systems, which leads to a better understanding of the relationships that comprise the system," end quote. An alternate reality game, or ARG, is an interactive transmedia narrative that evolves in response to what its players do. It uses the real world as a platform, often involving multiple media and game elements, to tell a story that may be affected by participants' ideas or actions. ARGs are typified by intense player involvement with a story that takes place in real time and evolves according to participants' responses, and with characters that are actively controlled by the game's designers, the ARG website says. ARGs generally rely on the internet as the central binding medium. ARGs are attracting attention because they've been able to engage large numbers of players in collaborative efforts to solve very difficult puzzles and challenges. Now, we've seen the effectiveness of ARGs in solving, for example, protein folding challenges, and in solving the molecular structure of retrovirus enzymes that opened the doors to new HIV or AIDS drug designs. But can they be used to solve the impending oil crisis? The fact that the game was played by people all over the world 10 years ago, and yet we are now using more oil than ever before, might tempt you to say no. Peakoil.com suggests that 2017 is, quote, "the year when the world economy starts coming apart," end quote, and shows that oil consumption has continued to rise since 2007, not fall. However, there is evidence in some places, most notably California, that energy use per capita is declining, giving us some hope. California has implemented its own appliance and building codes and championed progressive solutions for substituting conservation and renewable energy supplies for fossil fuels and been largely successful at creating a culture that fosters innovation. And there may be some correlation between the successes the state has had in reducing its dependency on fossil fuels and the number of people who engage in gaming and fantasy role-playing. After all, California beats all the other states by a significant margin. It could just be a correlation and not a regression, but it is interesting to speculate. For the fantasy of living without oil to become a reality, there need to be real solutions out there beyond hoarding food and supplies and building a wall around your property. Fortunately, there are. All of the things we associate with civilization that the game asks us to imagine living without, electricity, heat, travel, cars, plastic champagne, security, stability, caviar, all of them and more can be produced without oil. We associate them with the oil age because the abundance and cheapness of oil and the fact that the hydrocarbons that make it up were already processed into a compact, easily transportable energy in compound-dense form made it economical to rapidly achieve an explosion of innovation regarding various end products and end uses. But that doesn't mean we need oil to create these goods again. After all, oil is just life compacted, mostly plant matter with the odd dinosaur thrown in the mix. The hydrocarbon chains, the long molecular backbone of carbon bonds with hydrogen atoms sticking out like the legs of a centipede, are found in all carbon-based life forms and are endlessly manipulated through ontogeny and phylogeny to create ever more complex molecules with spectacular properties. Long before we discovered oil and coal and so-called natural gas and other fossil sources of hydrocarbons, these complex molecules existed and were explored and exploited by human beings. Pitch and tar were used to repair boats in ancient Egypt. The sap of trees like rubber and other sticky, elastic, and flammable substances and plant oils were used for medicine, for lighting, for manufacture, for combustion. And there's nothing that can be made out of fossil hydrocarbons, the residuals of ancient plants, that cannot be made out of the residuals of existing living plants. It just may cost a little more in the present. So what is the real worry here? Are we standing up for the poor? Is that what this is all about? Are we collectively suffering angst that when oil runs out, only the rich will have access to the caviar and the champagne? I kind of wish the fear of the impending oil crises was one of social justice, because as soon as the oil is gone, clever chemists and businesswomen will simply substitute today's biomass for yesterday's and keep producing all the goods and services we've come to expect. Oh yeah, initially they will simply be more expensive until the machinery is adapted to new feedstocks and the processes are brought to scale. And then they'll be cheap, the way almost all goods that are mass manufactured become cheap. A professor of mine at UCLA, the economic geographer Dr. Michael Storper, wrote in his books, among them Worlds of Production and the Capitalist Imperative, about how the real drivers of World War I and World War II were what has become termed the underconsumption crisis. Apparently, the Industrial Revolution made mass production its own undoing as far as the capitalist class was concerned. Once machinery was invented, basically ever-evolving robots who can do work faster, cheaper, and with greater precision, the cost of labor plummeted. With the cost of labor, which has always been the major factor deciding price, ever declining, the cost of goods in a fully competitive market was also ever declining. And this meant one of four things. Either A, you must deal with the ever-shrinking profit margins, or B, you must regulate production and place limits on the supply so it doesn't outstrip demand, or C, you must increase demand by growing population, or D, you must destroy capital stock so that you constrain supply. The Eastern Bloc, under so-called communism, tried to place limits on supply through regulation and protectionism and inefficiencies. The Western Bloc, under so-called capitalism, decided to promote ever-expanding population, but got in trouble because of the demographic shift wherein people relieved of the burdens of being reduced to slave labor stopped having as many children. They then tried two different tactics: expand to new markets through imperialism, and when that fails to keep pace with the need for expanding profits, destroy capital stock so as to artificially reduce supply. Wars radically reduce capital stock and so act as a reboot, enabling capital accumulation to occur again.